Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for more, yes, more podcasting greatness. And, you know, the amazing thing about this podcast is how unbelievably affordable it is. All you have to do is click play on YouTube and you can hear it, or of course on Stitcher, Google Play, or where iHeartRadio, wherever other good podcasts are sold. Hey everybody, as you can see, if you're joining me on YouTube, I am joined again this week by my good friend Ciprian Ivanof. Hey Ciprian.
Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back indeed. This has been, let me start this show by clarifying something, because I this is unusual. You know, the format of this show is the same as every other podcast I do, where I've, you know, you and I, people are, I have guests, I have people on, I interview them, I talk to them. And so this looks like an interview, and Ciprian and I got together on this at his suggestion, by the way. And a very good one, a really good one, which is why I took him up on it, because we have a series of podcasts here where we're diving into Scientology's organizational nonsense and madness and some of the short and long-term effects of the policies that L. Ron Hubbard invoked to run his organization, and some of the negative consequences of those policies, because there are a great many of them. Scientology is a highly regimented, organized activity. It is not a, you know, sort of roll your own sort of cult. L. Ron Hubbard spent years breaking down very exact ways that he wanted his organizations run, his churches, as he calls them. And I use that term loosely, and some people even protest that.
I would not use that term.
Exactly. And I get it. You know, I have gone on record as saying Scientology is not a legit religion, and I believe that. But at the same time, the government disagrees with me, and they are a legitimate, bona fide religion according to, you know, many institutions and governments in the world. So that's how I talk about them. And in this series of podcasts that Ciprian is joining me for, we are exploring or breaking down or talking about, you know, some of the policies and some of the activities that go on in these organizations, which I worked in for, you know, 25 years. That's a long time. I had a lot of experience with Scientology. I read a lot of those policy letters. I listened to a lot of L. Ron Hubbard's lectures, and I lived and walked that walk. And it was a hard one to do. It was a very difficult and abusive situation. And so I've got a lot to say about it. And Ciprian, of course, recommended, well, here's a list of things we can break down to talk about this. And I thought, absolutely, let's do it, you know. But a lot of this is just coming out of my head or my memories or my ideas about it. I wanted to start this show this week, though, sort of flipping the script a little bit, because while this has been a series of shows about, you know, my experiences or my ideas or whatever about this, I want to get Ciprian's feedback on this to start with, right? Because we've talked about sleep deprivation. We've talked about personnel and personnel transfers and the way that personnel are shifted and moved about, and you know, and other nonsense like that in terms of this of the organizations. So, Ciprian, what do you think about all of the stuff that we have covered so far, and what has stood out for you as the most noteworthy or bothersome, or you know, what the hell are these guys doing, you know? And how do you see this as an outsider, as somebody who was never a Scientologist?
As an outsider, Scientology's habit of documenting things makes it extremely valuable in understanding cult dynamics, because so much of this works together to create high stress, low thought, high demand for loyalty versus analysis environment. And because Scientology has documented so much of this, you can look at it from the outside and see how it plays into that. And in most of that, just bringing up topics and seeing what you say and your experience becomes much more valuable to understand it than an outside perspective who can only draw on examples from communism or other totalitarian groups. The specific examples of having lived it and being able to point to policies, documents, and people is why having you talk about your experiences is usually more valuable. With the effects of stress and the problems it causes, we need to go back to the issue of sleep deprivation and how important sleep is to handling stress, to identifying problems and avoiding them. The effects of a sleep deficit compound the effects of stress pretty dramatically. And I really want to reiterate that. Stress and sleep deprivation are closely linked.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about stress today, but remember that when you've got a lot of tired people, they're going to mess up. And that's going to add to the stress. That's going to add to the guilt and loyalty concerns. And that's going to just compound the stress people are under and put them into an even more narrow tunnel vision, panic focus. So when hearing some stories from Chris, one thing to bear in mind is how much sleep did these guys get? Were they mentally able to think about the situation as much as a fully rested person?
You know, that's a really, really important point. I'm glad that you were bringing that up as a point to stress, because I don't know that I've harped on it enough, and I don't know that I've actually even educated myself enough about it, to be completely honest. You know, we all know sleep is important, and we all know how we feel when we don't get enough sleep. Imagine having not enough sleep for years, you know, for decades. And that's the situation that Scientology put me in, you know, thousands of other people in who tried to do the work of being a Scientology staff member or a Sea Org member. They have very, very unreasonable high demands on every one of their members to invest as much of their time and energy into the organization as possible. And every effort is made through indoctrination, propaganda, peer pressure, you know, to get people in that group to pitch in as hard as they can for as long as they possibly can. And I don't know that I've even commented enough over the years about how many victims of that I saw just pass out of the organization over time. I mean, people would just be. There was a man who I think I mentioned in one of our episode about that, who worked for almost 2 straight weeks with getting almost no sleep at all. I mean, he had the darkest circles under his eyes, the most white pallor I have ever seen in any living person. After this, as a Sea Org member, I was looking at this guy going, "Holy shit! This guy needs to go to bed." I mean, this is unreal. And I watched the commanding officer of our organization encourage him to continue. Good job. We know it's rough, but you're doing the good work and you got to continue. And after he finished the project he was on, which was some dissemination piece, it was a promotional piece. After he finished that, he crashed harder than anybody I've ever seen crash in the Sea Org, and he ended up leaving the Sea Org. I mean, I hope that promotional piece was worth it, because that was the last thing he ever produced for Scientology, you know, as far as a Sea Org member goes. And he was he was an extreme example, but not the only extreme example. I saw so many cases of people on the RPF, outside the RPF, in management, in the service organizations, even the cooks, you know, even the estates crew being driven, being run like, you know, just herded like animals, you know, to get the work done at any and all cost. And it's that, and that is the epitome of Scientology organizational attitude is it's all about getting it done now, no matter what it takes. And it's always short-term thinking. There's no concept of long-term planning. The only long-term planning that exists in Scientology that we could count on as staff or Sea Org were the events. Were the fact that there was going to be an event coming up, right? There's going to be the IAS event in October. There's going to be the Sea Org Day in November. There's going to be the New Year's event on New Year's. There's going to be the March 13th event for the L. Ron Hubbard's birthday. There's going to be the May 9th event for the anniversary of Dianetics. There's going to be the Maiden Voyage events in July for the Free Winds. Those were the things you could count on. Everything else was up for grabs. You couldn't plan anything longer than about two weeks away with any degree of certainty.
That's a contributing factor to not being able to do good short-term planning as well.
That's right. And when you think about how everybody is in this organization from the top down, from going all the way to the top, Miscavige's inner circle is run this way. And they run their people this way, and those people run their people. In other words, the shit rolls downhill, as we all know. That's what happens in organizations, not just Scientology. But when the kind of abuse that is being, rolling downhill is the kind of abuse where you're not feeding your people well, where you're not letting them sleep. And this is a chronic condition, not just a short-term, one-off. If this was only something that happened once a year even, you could kind of deal with that. You go, oh my God, it's this horrible thing, but we only have to deal with it once every in a blue moon. Then you have what you could legitimately label an emergency situation or condition. This is in Scientology, by the way, called Condition 1. I don't know what Condition 2 is, but Condition 1 was everybody on deck, flat out emergency, nobody's going to study, sleep is optional. And we were in Condition 1 almost all the time, and to the point where after about 5 or 6 years of being in the Sea Org, it dawned on me that finally, because I'm such a slow learner, it finally dawned on me that these periods of in between Condition 1, those were going to be very few and far between. You couldn't trust them. We would get sometimes these waves, these sort of cycles periodically of everybody's going to get sleep. Okay, we've been tearing everything apart and it's crazy and we all know it's crazy. So let's put a schedule in. Let's get exercise time. Let's get sleep. Let's make everybody, studentable and sessionable, as they say, so that they can, actually absorb information when they go on study. We're going to make sure they get study. We're going to make sure everybody gets a little bit of exercise time every day. And they would try to organize this up. And after watching this happen numerous times, and after about a week, maybe, if it took that long, another Condition 1 came down, and it all went to shit. That's Sea Org life,
Yeah, the whole everything is top priority is one of the hallmarks of chaotic management.
That's right.
And it's very much a management problem because management has to prioritize and balance short-term versus long-term objectives.
That's right.
And when everything is all hands on deck emergency, you can't have long-term objectives and capabilities managed.
That's right. And the interesting thing about this, one of the horrible things about this is, even if at the city level you have the Class 5 churches, the churches of Scientology of Denver, Milano, whatever, right? You could have an executive director who runs that city level organization and supposedly is fully responsible for and is completely in charge of that organization.
but they aren't really because stuff comes down.
That's right. Every single day, this person is receiving orders from a management unit, the Continental Management Unit. So it doesn't, so he's fully responsible. The double binds that enter in here, and we talk about double binds, these are really important, right? These catch-22s, this, you have to do this, but you also have to do this, and both of these things are mutually exclusive. They can't both be at the same time, and yet they are, and this is crazy making. This is the anatomy of insanity. Double binds, and some of the double binds that exist organizationally is you as the executive director are fully 100% responsible for your organization, but we're management and we're telling you what to do because we know better than you do. So you're going to do this and this and this and this and this, and if you don't, you're for it. You're going to get busted. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to be physically punished, psychologically raked over the coals. And the executive directors learn this after a little while. So they go like, oh, well, shit, I can't really be fully responsible and make my own decisions because I have to spend all my time doing these dumbass orders you people send.
But they're still going to be treated as if they were fully in charge.
That's right. When it comes to punishment time.
In the military, it's supposed to be that you can delegate power, but you can't delegate responsibility. It doesn't always work that way, but the theory is there.
Right.
Scientology completely reverses that theory.
That's right. Agreed. And I wanted to comment on this more broadly because I don't know if you guys out there know this or not, but according to leaks that have been coming through from Mike Rinder's blog, it appears that this evolution, this new project is coming to a close. It looks like it's coming to a head within the world of Scientology, of having gone through all of the policies. Miscavige for decades now, since the last 21 years, Miscavige has had this long-term project of reorganizing, of reviewing and recategorizing and cataloging and organizing all of Hubbard's written policies and bulletins. And apparently they got themselves a really big building and gutted it out, this big warehouse, and they've laid out all these tables and all of Hubbard's issues in chronological order. And Miscavige has sort of reinvented how Scientology policies should be taught and is now doing that. They're calling people, staff members from all the organizations in the world to come to Flag, I think. And it's either going to be Flag or Los Angeles, one of the two. And they are training them, retraining them, newly training them on all of this organizational stuff that Miscavige has repackaged. This is really no different than what he did with the Scientology technology, the bulletins and the books, back when he released this thing we call the Basics back in 2004 or 5. When all of this new repackaged lectures and books and all this stuff was kind of dumped onto the Scientology world by Miscavige, and he had redone everything and revised everything and changed a bunch of stuff. But he said it was all as L. Ron Hubbard wanted him to do it, so it was all good, right? And this is where Miscavige famously bragged about removing 2,000 commas from one of Hubbard's books, The Science of Survival, and various other typographical errors and transcription errors and all this other stuff, which is just a bunch of nonsense. But it was Miscavige's excuse to rewrite L. Ron Hubbard and make it more the way he wanted it. And also renew copyrights, and there's all kinds of fun bonuses in that. Same now is happening with the organizational side of things, with Scientology's policies. So we're about to see, probably in the next coming months, the golden age of admin, of administration, right?
And my guess is that people are still going to be so stressed and without clear direction that they will go through the materials, they will regurgitate the words, but when it comes time to apply it, they won't have a clear idea of what to do, so they will go off of their best guess at the moment, which may not be very well thought through because one, the materials aren't very coherent, and two, they're under a lot of stress, so they are not going to be thinking very far ahead.
Exactly.
And that's going to create another series of organizational confusions.
Exactly. And let's be clear that it's not like the base material, the lectures, the raw lectures and policies that Hubbard wrote or had written for him. And there's a great many policies that L. Ron Hubbard never had anything to do with, except his name is on it. His wife, for example, Mary Sue, wrote a ton of policies. Other contributors, other executives that he had working under him came up with and wrote policies based on what they thought would work. But these policies are a mishmash. They're sort of organized by which area of the organization they most apply to. And then you have a series of policies that are written that are sort of blanket policies for everybody. And those are your basic staff policies. And those have been organized into their own book or volume, right? So you have these books of policy letters put together by the organization's divisions, if that makes sense. It's kind of like all the policies about how to be an executive are in the book for the executives, and all of the policies about how to sell people things are in this other book for the division 2, the promotion and sales people, and that's kind of how it's divided up.
Which makes sense if this stuff was clearly coherent.
Well, that was where I was going, right? Is that would be a decent or interesting way of organizing it. I believe Miscavige is changing that, and he's now making it cross-divisional. He's organizing them or categorizing them more according to how the what he calls the production lines of the organization, and we don't need to get into that today.
Which might also work, but it very much comes down to, are the core concepts clear enough to be applied?
Exactly.
And the way you organize those concepts can make a difference, but at the end, it is still based on the concepts themselves.
That's right. That's exactly where I was going, is he can resort or recategorize all this however he wants, but junk in is junk out. And that's what the problem is here, is if you actually go to the raw material, it's a bunch of crap. I mean, it doesn't work. It's either overgeneralized, so you can't apply it specifically enough, or it's too hyper specific and you get in trouble if you try to take this concept and generalize it into a more widely applicable thing. You have ridiculous policies about things like developed traffic, this business of how the organization gets in its own way. And, and stuff like this. There's just, when you dive into the details of it, I could give you a description of Scientology policies that would sound really cool, that would sound really positive. I could spin it to make it sound really positive. But having worked in the organizations for as long as I did, and trying desperately to apply these policies and watch other people struggle to do the same, and it really was a struggle all the time. You clearly come to the conclusion that this mishmash of advice and rules and double binds and catch-22s and problems that you're given by L. Ron Hubbard, and then the solutions he offers to them, they just don't fly. They don't work. And the only way that Scientology ever really moves forward or advances in any real positive or expansive way, I guess, does what it's supposed to do, is when some individual in the organization steps up, gets a bright idea, and just gets it done despite all the reasons not to.
Which is justified by one L. Ron Hubbard policy. What was that? Con?
Oh, the con thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
But which is contradicted by other policies.
Correct. That's right. For every For every policy to do this, you have another one that says don't do this.
Which means whoever's managing them and interpreting those policies is really going to be the determining factor.
That's right. But a reason I harp on this, maybe I should clarify this too, because I realize I've never actually said this out loud, but just like with Scientology's technology, quote unquote, the methods, the methodology of auditing and word clearing and teaching people things and all of that stuff, that includes, by the way, all the OT levels and auditing and going up to Xenu and all that. That is one half of Scientology. That's the technology. But there's this other half that is called the admin, the administration, the policies. Scientologists truly believe that L. Ron Hubbard wrote and devised a system of management and administration that is leaps and bounds better than any other organizational or administrative system that exists on Earth. They believe this because L. Ron Hubbard said so, and they believe it because L. Ron Hubbard claimed that the basic concepts and ideas that drive his theory of administration come from a civilization that existed in space 80 million years ago, and that organization lasted for millions and millions of years and was so big and so broad that it included, millions and trillions of people in it. Because it was a planet, it was an intergalactic civilization. And he said, we took that and we improved on it, and that's what we've got. We've got the secret sauce for organization. We've got the administrative magic. And that is what Scientologists believe all of these policies and lectures actually are, is they represent the most advanced system of management that exists anywhere in the world. And yet, when you look at Scientology churches failing across the world, you have to scratch your head a little bit and go, what? How is this supposed to be? How are these two things supposed to be true at the same time?
I mean, the only way I can imagine it is that a lot of the people hearing that don't have non-Scientology management experience.
I think that's true. I sure didn't. I went right into it, as a teen.
Jeff Hawkins, when he got his first job out of Scientology, he thought about introducing some Scientology management tech to them. But he decided to wait and see how things were running. And it turned out that he was a lot more productive with a lot more free time in his post-Scientology job. So that would seem to be a much better endorsement of the non-Scientology management at that job than when he was struggling to get even basic stuff done in Scientology.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I'll tell you something that I'm twigging on right now that we have definitely talked about before, but I'm going to highlight it right now, is the micromanaging spirit of Scientology management. Because I believe that this is actually primary cause to a lot of the problems we've discussed, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, right? Is this basic problem of L. Ron Hubbard didn't really trust anybody. And
which, to be fair, considering a lot of his early recruits, might have been fair.
It was not fair. He had, okay, let me put it this way. Scientology wouldn't exist if L. Ron Hubbard hadn't attracted to him a great many very smart, very bright, very willing to work people who thought that he had clued in on something amazing.
Yes.
Okay. So while he also managed to attract, the debris of society to some degree in certain
he attracted some very smart people and some very erratic people.
Yes, he did. And let's not also negate that Scientology can also make people erratic.
Yes.
Right.
I think that was less of a concern in the first few years.
I would disagree with you on that because the nature of what Hubbard was dealing with in the early first years was not light grade stuff. L. Ron Hubbard was producing psychotics, people who actually went nuts in the first year of Dianetics. And that's continued to be true moving forward. His efforts at using drugs, he was incorporating drugs and medications into the use, into the auditing procedure. He, sodium pentothal, for example, and similar things,
dear.
like powerful stuff.
Okay.
It even forced L. Ron, according to my recent talks with John Atack, it even forced L. Ron Hubbard to tell the truth in a couple early lectures about his own past.
I mean, it's not actually a truth drug. It's an anti-inhibitory.
Exactly. And so when L. Ron Hubbard would go on stage under the influence of some of these drugs, he would actually end up saying true things sometimes too, to tell you how powerful this stuff was. But the efforts to try to exteriorize people, get them out of their heads, have out of body experiences, that started in 1951 and was a very, very potent force in Scientology as early as 1952. And that was causing people to have psychotic episodes. So,
okay, you're looking at the Dianetics side, not the people trying to run an org.
Well, see, for a lot of these people, it was the same people, though. See, he was attracting followers and trying to and using them to run and man his little fledgling organizations and trying to keep this thing going. And those were his most ardent followers, you know. And the only reason I'm making this point is that L. Ron Hubbard was having personnel issues right from the get-go, and he was also a very egotistical, megalomaniacal kind of guy. This is just his personality, and he thought he was all that, and he was absolutely convinced that he was all that. So, yet he would also have these, you know, sort of bipolar episodes where he would go into these fits, these depressions, these absolute, you know, either rage fits or depressive episodes where he was sure he was a failure and it was all, and he was the worst person ever and all that. So you see him bouncing back and forth. But my point is that he never let himself trust the people that were trying to help him build this philosophy and this movement. And he was always in it for himself first. So that's why Dianetics went bankrupt in the first couple of years, because he kept going and raiding the till and pulling the money out and then blaming the staff. You guys aren't running an efficient organization. Look at your financial insolvency. Well, who's the guy coming in raiding the bank accounts every month, right?
Apparently, back when he was on the Apollo, he ended up having some guy go to Spain and carefully bring a refrigerated seafood dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the most ridiculous expenditure of resources I can think of.
And that's L. Ron Hubbard, man. You know, it was just kind of whimsical and whimsical, not light and airy fairy. I mean, whimsical, like it was on his whim. He just did what he wanted. And
it's tyrannical whim, not let's have fun whim.
Exactly. But the double bind being that when he blows into town and is, you know, on his whirlwind tours and lecture circuits of the 1950s, which he did every year throughout the 1950s, he would come through and talk about the spirit of play and how fun this is all supposed to be and how exciting it all is, and we're building a new world.
And he might have believed it when he was talking about it, but he didn't have the self-reflection to realize just how hard it is to have a spirit of play when you're constantly being shouted at.
Exactly. Because at the same time that he's spouting spirit of play, he's also beating people or having them beaten up, or you know, castigating them, you know, just pounding them into the ground because they're not making enough money, not getting enough people in, not getting the job done, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So he was real hell on wheels, Hubbard was. And I'm trying to kind of paint that picture because I want people to understand that this is no organizational genius, you know.
I will grant that he had some genius in that he got total amateurs to get 3 ships underway.
That was actually almost a miracle. I actually classify that. I classify that as a miracle.
That owes more to Hubbard having some idea of how ships work,
yeah,
than his actual competence at long-term organizational management.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. It is when L. Ron Hubbard took to the oceans, to the sea in 1967, late 66, 67. During that time period is when the Sea Organization started, and it was all volunteers. It was people who signed up who were absolutely dedicated Scientologists, absolutely loyal to Hubbard. That was the test: is you had to be loyal to him. So they were going to do whatever he told them to do, and he put them on these boats, and none of these people had a clue how to sail, how to boat around, how to be on the ocean. And somehow, miraculously, he took these 2 or 3 boats that were just almost falling apart. He hired a non-Scientologist alcoholic captain to captain one of the ships, and he had this volunteer crew who didn't know anything about boats, the Scientologists, and somehow miraculously got them down to Spain without killing anybody and without anybody dying, right? And when you hear about the storms they weathered, literally, and the work that they had to do on these boats, it is really, I just classify it, like I said, I think it's a miracle personally that nobody died, because the number of opportunities for disaster there were so great. And somehow, the one thing you can say about Hubbard is that he did know how to sail a boat. He was legit professional at sailing, and so somehow he managed to keep that together enough to keep everybody alive. But this was, again, not, as you just mentioned, not according to his because of his organizational genius. It was almost despite his organizational ineptitude that they pulled it off.
Yeah. Just looking over everything people do and screaming at them until they do very basic tasks can get a job done. It does not produce good results in the long term, but it can get a job done.
And I think that was the lesson he walked away with from that experience, rather than looking at it and going, holy shit, we barely survived this. How do we reorganize this so that we don't ever have this kind of nonsense happen again? It was, look what we pulled off. Look at how amazing we are. We're the most OT, amazing super beings on the planet because we could do this. And therefore, let's go ahead and keep doing it. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I think he got that impression a lot earlier, though. One of the things with the military in the 1940s was that it was dealing with a lot of people who didn't want to be there, who were scared of dying, and a lot of people who were really, frankly, quite dumb.
Okay.
And having trained people, officers, use intimidation to get people to do their jobs was an important part of getting stuff done. And a lot of this was broken down to be very simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have one guy whose job is to load train cars. You'll have one guy whose job is to scrape rust. You'll have one guy whose job is to refuel stuff. Broken down into a lot of very simple tasks that they can do when they're sleep deprived, when they're stressed, and it doesn't take a lot of thinking to do it.
Right.
And that worked in war because people still had to go to the front. They still had to risk their lives, and intimidation could get them to do it.
I wonder.
There were a lot of mechanical problems when bomber crews had to fly over Germany, and a lot of them died.
Yeah.
So were those mechanical problems causing people to fly back to England real, or was it fear? And turns out a lot of it was fear. And General Curtis LeMay, who was nuts, by the way, accurately noticed that. And he was in one of those planes, and he said the first plane to turn back was everybody was getting court-martialed. Very few planes turned back, and the job got done. But understand, that was intimidation. That did not produce a lot of internal initiative.
Right.
And when you compare American damage control, where people could exercise initiative, versus Japanese damage control, where people couldn't exercise initiative, the American damage control did a heck of a lot better job.
Right.
But if you've got unskilled people who are under a lot of stress and sleep deprivation, intimidation might be the only way to get stuff done. But it's not going to be a good job.
And it's not going to be something that's going to serve you well as a long-term management strategy.
Oh, heck no. Oh, heck no.
And I think this is actually maybe speaking to, in terms of primary causes, I think you might be hitting on something here as to why it is that this attitude is imbued through all of Scientology's organizations. And by this attitude, I'm referring to what you just said about when you're in war, when you're in a high stress, do or die situation, then you can see that while as abusive and horrible and awful as it might be, when it's do or die, people step up in some amazing ways and pull off things that they never imagined they'd be able to pull off because they feel their back's against a wall and it is do or die. We got to hit this target. We got to take this town out. We have to hit this objective. And you give it your all, even your life, for the purpose, for the overall cause of the activity. And Hubbard did live that, even if he didn't live real combat and see real, European or Asian theater.
But he was around people who did.
Yes,
and
he was.
Understood the need.
That's right. And I'm wondering if his takeaway from that organizationally, in terms of how he then decided to run his organizations years later, was to, create this cultic mindset where we are at war. We are at war with the reactive mind. We're at war with psychiatry. And eventually, after a few years, Scientology was at war with the entire government of the planet, according to L. Ron Hubbard. Right? And it was war. It was do or die.
The unity and sacrifices and achievements produced by that can make war very exciting.
Yeah.
And that was possibly one reason why war was viewed as very exciting by a lot of historians and the general public. And there was a pacifist in World War I who talked about civilian economic programs by the government being the moral equivalent of war, where you get all the benefits of massive amounts of effort, but without the killing.
Mm.
It also had the side effect of a lot of problems, but
well, see, that's the thing.
The kind of excitement people craved.
Exactly. And again, on a short term, when you first get into it and you get into this machine, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. We're saving the world. I mean, when I first joined the Sea Org, I thought I had signed on with, the Rebel Alliance. I mean, I thought we were going to change the world. We were fighting the good fight.
Rebel Alliance in Star Wars: A New Hope, and it turned out it was the Rebel Alliance from the sequel trilogy.
Force Awakens. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, Last Jedi. That's right. I thought I was getting Empire Strikes Back. I was getting The Last Jedi. Exactly. That's you're exactly right. Because, but to a young person, I mean, I was 25 when I joined the Sea Org. I mean, I was fully ready to rock, and I had so much energy, and I had so much to give, and I gave it all. I really did. I mean, I'm the one who stepped up and decided, yeah, the Sea Org, that's what I got to do. So I went into that thinking that I was entering into this pitched battle against the reactive mind. And everybody around me was on the same terms. We were all there like, yeah, we're going to rock this thing. And it's really easy in a group like that to lose sight of or lose perspective. You lose all perspective. And then you enter into this battle sort of footing, this war footing where everything, every task, every project, every work, piece of work that you're given to do is super important. It's do or die. It's everything hinges on this. And this is that kind of constant emergency thing that I was talking about when I first got out, and I've been mentioning for years, is this kind of frantic emergency. It's a war footing. And that's another way of describing it.
And that creates its own problems.
Yeah, huge
Not just
problems.
because of individual burnout, which is a huge problem.
Yep.
Especially when you can't get new people.
Yep.
But there's also the issue of you still have to prioritize. Because if you just go into emergency mode for the first thing that comes along, and then the next thing that comes along, and so forth, you aren't responding to the larger strategic issues. You're responding to randomness.
That's right. And after a while, everything takes on a monotone of importance because everything is super, super, super important. There's never any order that comes down that is sort of, this one can wait till next Tuesday. You got other things you're doing right now. Put this one on the back burner. Get it done, but get it done after this and this and this. That's never how orders were communicated in Scientology, right? And I think that, and let me take a second to point this out, because I think we've stumbled on an analogy or a model here that is very, very intensely useful for describing Scientology and the Sea Org attitude, and that is that, the only way that kind of short-term emergency war kind of thing works over any length of time, months, years, is if the generals and the people lower on the command chain have some concept of what they're involved in and what the long-term strategic targets are, right?
And if they're allocating people based on actual emergency situations,
yes,
rather than throwing them at every situation.
Exactly.
Because if people are going to kill themselves on trivial objectives, that's going to be a waste of effort.
My point, exactly, because the people at each level are not actually being briefed, or conversely, and this is where the deceptive part of Scientology comes in, they get briefed, but then 2 days later, the priorities change. And then the priorities change again, and then they change again. And then, after about the fourth time they've changed, they circle back around to the first one, and they go, how come this isn't done? What the hell? And you're like, dude, you gave me task number 1, which is going to take me a month to get done. And then you give me task number 2, which pulls me off of task number 1. Then you give me number 3. Then you give me number 4. Then you tell me all of them have to get done now. And then you give me a COMEV because I didn't get the first one done.
And that's a classic case of working at cross purposes, destroying the effectiveness of all those efforts.
Exactly. And that's a management problem. That's a leadership problem. It is a lack of leadership problem. It's a fake pseudo leadership problem. You have somebody who looks like they're a leader, but they are not. And I am not just referring to the top with David Miscavige, but all the middle management people who are trying so desperately to be good leaders and provide good management to their people. They get fucked on this. They get sandwiched on it every time.
And that's one of the things I noticed in hearing a lot of accounts from Scientology, that a lot of the leadership techniques seem to just amount to yelling at people and telling them to get it done.
Because you're so desperate.
And there's a place for that.
Well, but you don't know what else to do. I mean, you can't. You don't know why this is a priority. You don't know when the next priority is going to come down or where it's going to come from. And people below you are like, dude, I don't get it. And after a while, you're the leader. You don't get it. So you're like, shut up and do it.
And didn't you mention one of the people when you were a staff member just shouting at people in her office, which is right next to where the public was studying?
My first experience with the Sea Org was that. It was me as a 15-year-old studying in the classroom in Santa Barbara while the Sea Org member who ran the organization ripped into every single staff member about how they weren't getting enough work done. And she was yelling at full voice. I mean, you could hear her on the other side of the building. We're right on the other side of the wall, where I'm having to tell the supervisor, dude, could we please tell her to, this is distracting. And the supervisor would have to go over and go, sir, if you could, got students studying, and she's like, oh, yeah, okay, sorry, And then 10 minutes later, she's yelling at somebody else again. This was how I was introduced to Scientology. I don't know why it is I didn't just walk out the first day, except I was just an idiot 15-year-old, and I'd been primed to believe that this was the really good stuff, so I had to deal with that.
And just hearing that from a distance, you don't know if maybe there's a legit issue, that sometimes an organization is dysfunctional, so some intimidation is needed for a short-term corrective.
Yep.
Or it could be the person is just kind of sadistic and they love the interpersonal domination aspect of yelling, and making everything a priority becomes an excuse to harass people and assert interpersonal dominance.
Exactly. And that becomes the sort of, I think I'm going to say it this way. I'll describe it this way, is that sort of the artificial personality of a Scientology executive that is sort of put on Scientologists like a suit of clothes. When you get in, you get indoctrinated into this mindset that this is how you have to be in order to get compliance. To get people to follow your orders, you have to yell and scream at them because, as L. Ron Hubbard wrote in his own goddamn policies, your executive presence and demand has to be more powerful than this person's reactive mind that is telling him not to comply with your orders. So that's where all the yelling and screaming comes in, right? So
they're using reactive mind as the explanation for why people wouldn't do something instead of the typical, you've told me to do 20 things already.
Yes. It's just your reactive mind. My demands are not the unreasonable part of this equation. Your failure to get them done is what is unreasonable.
And that's a recipe for a lot of stress on the part of the junior, a lot of stress on the part of the senior. And guess what happens when people are stressed? The brain changes.
Yeah.
I believe a Marine colonel by the name of Cooper, he's famous. It's famously called Cooper's Colors, developed a kind of category system for how the brain responds to stress. You've got condition white, yada, yada, every day is normal, nice, there's no stress. Condition yellow, elevated heart rate, some more mental focus, blood shifts from some of the less immediately used parts of the body. You might have more adrenaline running, slightly narrowed vision. So people in certain more technical roles in combat might have it, like helicopter pilots. Condition red. You start to get tunnel vision because the body is in fight or flight mode. And part of it is that the eyes change shape. Mm-hmm. So it's designed to focus very accurate vision on a very narrow circle.
Right. Yeah, you become very focused on the threat.
And a lot of the blood goes away from your brain to your muscles, your heart, and other things needed for physical fighting. Mm-hmm. So when people are in an environment that requires intellectual thinking, going into the wrong stress reaction can be devastating.
Good point. Very good point. And exactly what the Sea Org is design is pretty much, at least it's what it appears to be to me, what it's designed to do. And I think that this is a reflection of Miscavige as much as it is Hubbard at this point. I mean, Miscavige is certainly the guy running Scientology now. L. Ron Hubbard wrote a lot of shit down, but Miscavige is the one who implements it. And the way
Hubbard
he
used
implements
flattery at times.
He did.
I have not heard of Miscavige using personalized flattery very often.
No, he uses it with people like Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Right? Best buddy, Tom Cruise, right? Best buddy who he reads the confidential secrets of to his other Sea Org members over scotch or whiskey, and while he's, when Tom's not around.
And frankly, I think that Miscavige probably likes Tom Cruise more than the people who are more submissive.
Oh, I think he does too. And yet, look at how he acts, right? I think you're absolutely right. I think Tom Cruise is one of the few people David Miscavige actually trusts. But, it's only because Tom Cruise is a goddamn fanatic, and he's totally bought into Miscavige's BS. So
I think, that's going down on a rabbit hole.
It's an interesting one, but it speaks a little bit to to Miscavige's attitude about people. I think he hates people. I don't know that Hubbard hated people, but I am absolutely positive that he didn't trust people, and that he wasn't into people except for how they would be tools to advance his agenda. I think Miscavige is exactly the same way, but I think that his hatred is expressed much more easily. Even to his inner circle, I'm talking about. To the people who he actually relies on.
I haven't seen any sign that Hubbard hated people, but he certainly loved adulation, and he feared rejection, I think.
Yeah, very much. I think that's true.
But I think when Hubbard was trying to get stuff done, the impression I get is that he would sometimes reduce the stress level.
Yes.
So that people would have more ability to focus on the task.
Sometimes he would do that. Often he would do that after he scapegoated somebody. Something would get done or something wouldn't get done, and Hubbard would find somebody else besides himself to take the blame for it, even though it all originated with Hubbard. And Snow White was the perfect and biggest example of this, where he threw his own wife under the bus rather than take responsibility.
I'm thinking in terms of a very short-term task, like how do you paint this part of the ship?
Yeah. No, I'm speaking to that too. It's just a pattern. It's how he acts, right? And so we can see it most obviously in something very public, like the Snow White bust when the FBI raided the church in the 70s. But absolutely, you see this come down into the short term as well. But here's the thing that Hubbard would do. I'm going to share a story with you about Hubbard that somebody told me that I believe is true, because the person would have literally had to have either made it up, and they had no reason to do that when they told me this story, or they were delusional, and I have no reason to believe the person was delusional when they told me this story. This was a Sea Org member while I was in the Sea Org telling me an L. Ron Hubbard story about his personal experience with Hubbard on the ship. And he was there, and Hubbard was, he got called to Hubbard's office. And he was there with another guy. And he was the kind of person who was actually terrified of Hubbard, because he was new on the ship. He was relatively new to the Sea Org, and he was very nervous and very freaked out. And he goes up to Hubbard's office, and Hubbard is standing there. Oh, and he said he was always at deep attention, and yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And it was very serious. And this is how he was telling me, how Hubbard broke him of this attitude, is he was standing there at attention, and this other guy was giving some briefing to Hubbard, reading from a report, and Hubbard's sitting at his desk. And every time this guy who's reading from the report looks down at his paper and he's not looking at Hubbard, Hubbard's sticking his tongue out at this guy, making faces at him, trying to bust him up. He's standing at full attention, thinking he needs to be, this very serious, oh, I'm standing before the Commodore, right? And Hubbard wasn't having any of it. He was like, "Bleh," and he was purposefully trying to get him to bust up, and he finally did. The guy just lost his shit, totally fucking started laughing. Hubbard's laughing. The other guy's standing there going, what's going on? He didn't get it at all. And he said after that, he was actually really at ease around Hubbard. Now, I don't know that that's true because Hubbard was bipolar as hell, but
I can believe it.
I would never imagine David Miscavige doing that.
And I did, yeah, same.
Right? And I think that's the difference between L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige is that Hubbard would allow for moments of levity. Hubbard would allow for joking and for let's not all be so serious all the time. And Miscavige
joking
never,
and degrading aside.
Well, exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. Again, let's not take more into what I'm saying than what I'm saying, right?
Hubbard had some moments.
Yes. Exactly.
He was a hypocrite, definitely, but he had some moments of levity.
That's right. That's right. The only time I ever heard of any levity around Miscavige, I mean, I heard about Miscavige going out to see movies with the people before he was the big head honcho. He would be in there partying with them and stuff too. But after he assumed command, after he took over, I never heard anything like that. The only story I ever heard about David Miscavige messing around or joking around was one time he was apparently going around the gold base with some pop rockets or fireworks of some kind and throwing them into people's offices to startle them.
Oh dear God.
And so they were, and this girl was telling me this story because she used to work at CMO Int before she got busted, and she was working where I was. She was telling this story about how they were holding the door and jokingly trying to keep him out, and he was kind of playing along while he was trying to throw these firecrackers in there. So that was the only example I have to give you of somebody having told me a story, an anecdote about Miscavige in a moment of levity. I heard many stories about Hubbard like that. Something that would be
perceived as levity by other people.
Exactly. And even then, what was he doing? He was running around the base throwing fireworks into people's offices to scare the shit out of them. So, yeah, Miscavige, the prankster.
I think Miscavige was getting a kick out of the musical chairs incident.
Oh, yeah.
That was his version of levity.
That's right.
But in terms of stress, one of the things that people do when they're under a lot of pressure is that they stop coordinating with other people beyond what's needed for their immediate job.
Yep. That's right.
So with all the pressure on stats around Thursday at 2?
Yep.
You think people are more cooperative on Monday, or are they more cooperative on Thursday around 2?
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on how cooperative is relative to which task or product are you trying to produce. If I'm trying to produce product A and you're trying to produce product B, and I need something from what you're producing in order to produce my thing, we're not going to cooperate at all. I'm going to completely elbow you out of the way and get my thing done, right? Because I'm going to be for it if I don't, and so are you. And some people think that's healthy competition, but believe me, what I just described was not implemented in a healthy way.
And that's been noticed with other organizations. That's one reason why the fire the bottom 10% policy tends to stop working after a few years, because you run out of easy people to fire. And then you run into a lot of people desperate to save their jobs. And that means they stop focusing on anything other than what they're being rated on.
Exactly. And that self-preservation instinct is completely organic, completely understandable, but it destroys cooperation, esprit de corps, and any real forward motion of the organization. Because let me share another little tidbit out of Sea Org management and staff to a lesser degree, but definitely experienced it there too, is you have every single day the head executives of whatever organization, whether it's a management or a service organization, every day the department heads or division heads meet to do what's called a product conference. At the management level, this is a network coordination committee. And the head of the conference is either the executive director, or in the case of the management, it could be the RTC person, it could be a CMO person. It's a high-powered person. And the usual way that these meetings were run was not, see, ostensibly it's for coordination. It's, okay, you're going to work with this, but this is going to get this. What are you going to get done today? What do you need from the other people in the room to get your products?
And if everybody's under stress, it's going to stop being
not only stress, but the meeting itself becomes a stress point. Because if you are stupid enough to speak up, you're probably going to get ripped into. Oh, I need something from X, right? I need the LRH communicator to get ABC done. You have this program, it tells you to do this. I need your help with that. And if the person who's running the meeting has a problem or a beef with you, let's say on that particular day, or they're irked at you or pissed at you for some reason, then you say, hey, I could use this cooperation. And they go, oh, you could, huh? Why don't you shut the fuck up and get your job done instead of asking for everybody else to do your job? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Straight up.
I'm used to that. The main risk being blame shifting.
Oh, no, this is straight up. How dare you tell this person to get your job done? Your job is to get that done. You figure it out.
Wow, that's even more dysfunctional than the other examples I know of.
Yeah, that's par for the course. And that only has to happen to you about 2 or 3 times before you will never, ever, ever ask for any coordination or cooperation in that meeting. You learn very quickly that if you want to work with somebody else, you do it outside the meeting. And then the meeting itself, which, by the way, dominates 1 to 2 hours of your day every single day.
And the meeting becomes a wasted block of time.
It's not a coordination meeting. It's not a cooperation meeting. It's a face-ripping meeting. Your face is getting ripped off. And you don't know every single day that you walk into that room whether you're going to be the target or whether somebody else is going to be the target, or whether all of you are going to be the target, because that would happen sometimes too. Okay, everybody stand up. All of you to pots right now. You guys are all just a bunch of inefficient, incompetent boobs, right? And we all find ourselves scrubbing pots for an hour, right? Because, the person who's running the meeting is on a tear that day. They're in a bad mood. They're getting their face ripped. I mean, again, this is all shit rolling downhill.
It's not just going downhill. It's being accelerated by the people at the bottom.
Well, that when they're getting their face ripped, they want to pass along the love to everybody else. I mean, that's how it rolls in the Sea Org. So I wanted to bring up the organizational revisions that are happening right now. This whole training, this OEC, FEBC training, whatever they're calling it. They have any number of alphabet abbreviations they can throw at things in Scientology, just like the military. But however they reorganize Hubbard's policies or edit his lectures or talk about how everybody was getting it wrong and now we've got it right, no matter how much of that nonsense Miscavige layers over to the Scientologists, and believe me, they're going to suck it up when he does.
It's still being applied within the same dysfunctional culture.
Exactly. Miscavige is what needs to change. The whole structure needs to change. Everything about this situation is the problem. It's not we didn't have some policies understood, and if we could just get people to understand these policies, everything would work beautifully. That's not the picture in Scientology. And, I dare say other organizations as well.
I can believe that. Another thing that causes stress is uncertainty. And when you can see that a senior is nervous, it becomes a point of concern from your standpoint about, okay, if I start to do what the senior is telling me to do, will it change in the next day?
Right.
So
that happens.
A stressed out senior may not do a good job of prioritizing what has to happen below them, which is going to compound the stress of the person trying to do the job.
That's right. That's right. And I ran into this so many times. I had a position where I had juniors. I had people in a division under me when I was a Sea Org member, not in management. After I went over to AOLA, I was running the Division 4, the technical division there, to get people onto the OT levels. And I drove the stats up real fast. I mean, it wasn't, it was the person who had been doing the job before me didn't know what they were doing, and the people who were working there were apathetic, never got time off, never felt like anybody cared about the work they were doing. They had just become, kind of automatons. So I went in there and I was like, hey everybody, let's do some work, right? Let's actually have some fun with this. And I started working with them individually and giving them things to do and things they could do, and I would be the buffer, manage. My senior was one of these, ruthless. Nobody deserves time off. Nobody deserves a bonus. Nobody deserves validation when they do a good job. Fuck them all. They're all just a bunch of scumbags. This was her attitude about the people who worked for me, my juniors. So I was like, okay, well, I can't listen to her because she's useless. So I just started directing them on what to do. And I knew the policies and I knew how to get the work done. So I was directing them on what to do. And we rocketed the statistics and everything was taking off. So she couldn't touch me. And I started giving rewards to my people and bonuses and time off. And we did a movie night a couple nights and stuff like that. She hated all of that. She was like, you shouldn't have to. She literally told me, I said, I'm buying production. You are giving me $30 to go, rent a movie and some popcorn for these people. And I'm producing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in return for this organization. You are helping me buy production from these people. That's what we're doing here, right? I was trying to put it in terms she would understand. And she still was like, I just don't think you should have to buy production from people. They should just do the work because they're here to do it. And I was like, do you not understand how people work? People want some validation. I think that's a big issue with how a lot of dysfunctional leaders become dysfunctional, because I don't think they understand the importance of stress relief. No, they don't. The effect of stress on productivity. That's right. And this was a case where she wasn't even one of these people who was getting shit on all the time. This is just how she was. It wasn't rolling downhill. She was the one who started it. I mean, I was just like, I can't believe this. After about what was it? I think it was about 6 months of working for her before I finally started losing my head started blowing up around her, and I just finally started telling her, you just don't know what you're talking about. I can't listen to you. You have no idea how to run people. The way you run me, if I tried to run these people the way you talk to me, I wouldn't get anything done. You don't give me anything. I finally just was blowing up in that direction.
I mean, positive rewards can have their own risks, but there's a whole value of stress relief.
Exactly.
And even in war, even in infantry operations in World War II and Korea, there were things to help people relieve stress.
Right.
They brought cigarettes in rations. There were little, very small books that were given to people so they could read to take their mind off of the constant stress.
Right. I mean, in addition to the
in Korea, they had a coffee shop at the front, so people could have some sense of normality.
Exactly. Because if you're going to put people into a long-term high stress situation, it is absolutely incumbent on you, if you care at all about those people, that you allow them to blow off the steam that is built up in them, that you allow them outlets, healthy outlets for their energy and for their angst and their frustrations, because they're going to have them. It's not normal for people to be in high stress, long-term situations. That's not good for us, and people will do it. and they'll do it for all kinds of reasons that they think are good reasons. And sometimes they are really good reasons. I mean, World War II was a really good reason. I mean, it wasn't like there were bad reasons for being there. That needed to happen. But if you're going to take care of these people, if you care about them at all, then you're going to give them these opportunities for stress outlet. And the Sea Org doesn't provide that. And when I literally tried to provide it, I was shown very clearly how I was the one off the rails. I was the one who didn't know what I was talking about. And even with my stats out the roof, my senior still hated me for what I was doing. So,
And the effect of stress on productivity tends to be exponential, not additive. So if you have 10 units of stress, it might be closer to 50 loss of production.
Yeah.
Not 10 loss of production.
That's right. That's right. I would say that that's absolutely true, because having produced in a stressful environment and in a non-stressful environment, I can compare my productive output, and it's definitely different, definitely in terms of quality.
And I'd like to point out that the whole assumption that you should just tell people to do something and they'll do it without any need for stress relief, that I think comes from the assumption that any resources not applied to production are wasted.
Yeah.
And they don't see stress relief as one of those things applied to production.
That's right. That's right. It was a basic philosophical difference that she and I were experiencing, because she thought people were automatons and they should just do what they're told and do their job and shut up. And she was there, and those were the reasons why she was an awful senior. She was awful. She was one of the worst I ever had. Some other people in my Sea Org experience did get it or did understand it more or better. Sometimes they felt between a rock and a hard place because they wanted to give some positive reinforcement or give some rewards or give some bonuses, but the money wasn't there, or the time wasn't there, or they had a senior who wasn't into it. So it's not that everybody in the Sea Org doesn't get it. I was in the Sea Org and I got it.
I think Hubbard got it. He did have kind words for people. He
From time
did
to time.
flatter people.
He understood that that stress relief was a thing. I mean, he had parties on the boat. He had, beer and cheese at Christmas. He had things that he would do that even if he wasn't the one who originated it, at least he didn't stop it from happening. And Miscavige just straight up stops that stuff from happening and doesn't care. And it's all about, it's everything for him and nothing for everybody else. Hubbard was everything for me and very little for everybody else. So if you're looking for a difference there, he understood
that he was kind of seeding it.
Yeah,
that letting people relieve some of their stress made them more productive for him.
Yeah. Yes,
but
I think that's true.
He understood stress relief was part of having a functional crew.
I mean, to a degree, like I said, to a degree.
Yeah, he still bullied people. He still threatened people. He still shouted at people. The messengers shouting at people was pretty basic. I'll play the nice guy and you play the bad guy.
Well, except for the fact that he never let on that he was the nice guy and they were the bad guys.
Well, sometimes he did.
Yeah, sometimes. But like I said, he scapegoated people more often than not for his own bullshit. And that was where he was really pretty tyrannical himself. Because you could think you were in his good graces. And you see, here's how Hubbard would screw you, is you think you're doing good, you think everything's fine, and then he cuts you off at the knees. So he had his own bullshit with this too. I don't have to hate on Hubbard on everything. I don't want to also paint too positive a picture of the guy either.
I mean, relative to Miscavige,
that's really where I
mean, Hubbard was not somebody I want to work for.
Never.
But he's still better than Miscavige.
Exactly.
It's the difference between Lenin and Stalin.
Right, exactly, exactly. Did you want Hitler or did you want Mussolini? Which one were you looking for here? Yeah,
Both of them are bad choices.
exactly, exactly. But
Uh,
different flavors of it. So okay, so that was yeah. So stress in the Sea Org, stress in Scientology. This bleeds over to the public in that they're the ones who have to be the receiving end of all of this.
of some of the stress, because I get the impression that the public still get kind of treated with kid gloves relative to the Sea Org.
To the degree that they can be, but it explains an awful lot of the 2 a.m. knock on the door, we need your money now. Like, why would they do that? Well, this is why, because they're not thinking straight. They're really not. When somebody's knocking on your door to try to get $5,000 from you at 2 a.m, this is somebody who is not thinking straight.
That's burning a long-term contact for a short-term goal.
Correct.
And that's the tunnel vision.
That's right. And even when you try to resist that, you try to push back on it, you try to say, no, I'm not going to do this. This isn't right. I'm going to burn this contact, like you say. That happens so many times. And the guy above you, he doesn't care. He's not invested. He doesn't know this person. All he sees is a number, a quota that has to be met, and you better get it done. And if that's the only way you can do it, then get to it.
That's freaking terrible. But
Yep.
I think there's another aspect. People respond to different situations with stress or not stress. So some people get really stressed out when they're shouted at. Some people aren't as stressed out by that.
Yep.
Some people get really stressed in social situations. Some people don't get as stressed out.
Yep.
Some people are a lot more comfortable reading dense administrative material. Other people are not.
Mm-hmm.
And normally people self-sort into that. The people who are A-okay with math and numbers are probably more likely to go into accounting than being a bus driver.
Sure.
The people who are more okay with interacting with strangers might be more likely to go into sales than working in a lighthouse for the next 20 years.
Sure.
In the Sea Org, I get the impression that it is not quite as self-selected.
It's more difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I thought when I was in the Sea Org that I was particularly good at getting myself into and out of situations that other people seem to get stuck in terms of jobs that were foisted off on us or things we had to do. Every Saturday we had to do cleaning stations, and you'd have to white glove the office. Everybody spent the morning vacuuming, dusting, cleaning, getting into the air ducts. I mean, real cleaning. I mean, we were cleaning fanatics. We had very clean spaces. I hated that. I hated doing that crap, right? But because I didn't like being ordered around. I didn't like security guards coming around and checking on me. I didn't like this feeling like I was a 4-year-old, right? So I arranged to go do the shredding. So I would take all the shredding, put it on a cart, and off I would go. And I was away from all of that. And that was actually kind of representative of my later years in the Sea Org, where I got myself the hell off the base to go do recoveries and stuff and go work on these ideal org missions, because I just got sick and tired of being on the base and all the pressure and craziness of the base. And so you could kind of, because I did it, I saw that you could finagle your way around in different ways, but it was never a skill that I could ever describe to other people. I don't know how I did it. I just did. I even right now, as I sit here, I can't tell you, well, I did this and I did this and I did this, and that's how I made that happen. Somehow I just advantaged myself in certain ways that I could sort of wind through this labyrinth of crazy and get myself into these positions that were not as stressful as the other positions I saw people in. And I guess I got really good at that after having been shoved into so many stressful situations that I just got sick and tired of it.
And I think part of that has to do with a certain ability to withstand stress and pressure.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of situations where a person is, I know this is what needs to be done, but the moment they encounter a bunch of angry people, they just fold.
Yeah.
And that I don't know if that's more common in cults, but that certainly seems to be one of the things keeping people in.
Absolutely. And you'll find a proclivity toward that way more in cults than you will in other situations, because I will certainly connect the dots here that an extremist mindset, by definition, is a mindset of stress. It's the extremism is kind of concentrated stress that way, because you are angst up about some problem that could be a legitimate problem in the world, or could be a legitimate problem in your life, but you are exaggerating its importance or exaggerating its urgency way beyond where it should be for you as an individual. The saving the world thing is an example of this. I can never rest. My head can never hit the pillow and actually have a good night's sleep, because somewhere somebody is being suppressed. Somewhere somebody has a reactive mind. Somebody somewhere, there's some problem that I'm responsible for and I have to solve because I am that big of a being.
And if your head isn't hitting the pillow, are you actually able to save the world?
Well, see, you don't think that far, because you have to save the world, and that's all that matters. And so my head hitting the pillow is the option in that picture.
You're under so much stress that your vision narrows to the point that you stop being productive towards your core goal.
That's right. But you don't let yourself know that. And nobody else around you in a cult environment is going to stop and smell the roses. That's not the environment creates that mindset. And that's as good a description of a cult as anything else. It's a group of people who are riling themselves up to this incredibly hyperbolic, exaggerated idea of their own importance. And this speaks a little bit to what we were talking about before the show with righteousness and self-righteousness. Is everybody's in this headspace of utter self-righteousness, and they've riled themselves up, each other, to get into that headspace where it's just this righteous view that we're right, everybody else is wrong, everything I do is perfect, everything else everybody else does is totally stupid, and you don't have the luxury of self-criticism or reflection in that picture. And so you don't even think for a moment that anything you're doing could be wrong.
And in that period of extreme stress and confidence and sense of emergency, all sorts of bad things happen.
Big time. Empirically
and
so.
Under a period of stress, people are also less likely to acknowledge a mistake on their part, and they're less likely to correct it, and they're more likely to push back against people who pointed it out.
Correct. And that's a great observation. That's exactly what's going on there. And I think we've talked about this enough that I think we should start wrapping up this show, because I think we've covered some really good territory here. And certainly you're always so good at this, because you know what you do for me in these shows is you bring up memories that I have forgotten all about. I mean, it's stuff I just have forgotten completely about, because I think if you guys have watched this show for the last hour and a half, I think you guys can understand why I would want to forget about all of this. I mean, I don't forget about it, but you know what I mean. Why I'd want to put all this behind me and maybe not think about it so much. It's because I have so many memories of so much stress that it becomes traumatizing. I mean, it's not just short-term stressful situations that all of us experience. It's an enforced stress that goes on for not just days, not just weeks, not just months. It went on for years. At this high level, it's exhausting. It's grueling. It's stupefying. It makes you stupid. It made me incredibly stupid. And it really disadvantaged me in so many ways. And if you want to know, I guess really this does such a great job of answering, why do Scientologists act like such idiots? Why do they relate to other people in such a stupid way? You really don't have to look a whole lot farther than what we've talked about in this episode. Even if you can dig into Hubbard's bullshit and his references and his nonsense, but we also should look at the environment in which these beliefs are propagated and talked about, and that's what we're doing with these shows. And I think that it explains a lot about the behavior.
I mean, one of the notable things in a lot of totalitarian movements is the paranoia.
Yeah.
And that paranoia becomes a huge reason why internal critics are suppressed, why a lot of nasty things are done to people, and why a lot of organizational catastrophes happen.
Yeah.
Because it becomes hard to tell the difference between someone who's making a genuine observation and someone who is a presumed enemy.
That's right. Exactly right. And this is why this entire effort that Miscavige is on right now to revise all this crap and re-put it out and repackage it and all that, you know, if he's got a sincere bone in his body, and I really don't believe that he does, but if this were a sincere effort to reform Scientology's organizations and get them on the straight and narrow and get them producing again, like they were in the 70s, let's say, when Scientology was having an actual boom period, if that is this effort, it's going to fail. It's going to fail miserably. And Miscavige is going to be 100% responsible for it because he's the guy who runs Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard's policies are secondary to David Miscavige's commands. And so the flavor of Scientology, the look and feel of Scientology, and the organizational attitude and culture of Scientology all come from him at this point. You know, we really, there's very few things to realistically point the finger at Hubbard about still. The base beliefs and all the craziness, yeah, sure. But in terms of the culture and how the thing runs, it's Miscavige. And therefore we can say, why is Scientology tanking? Why is Scientology one of the most failed cults of the last 2 decades? It's 100% because of David Miscavige, his incompetence and his sadism. And then it's really that simple. Well,
I'll say the observation that Scientology survives despite itself.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of Scientology is interesting as a very repressive middle-class cult.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a lot of rather repressive lower-class cults, but not so many repressive middle-class cults. Those tend to burn out pretty quickly. But Scientology recruited a lot of relatively educated or at least smart middle-class people decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they created an organization that was very bureaucratic, had a lot of gloss and appeal, but lasted a lot longer than a lot of others. So it's kind of one of those weird cases, one of the first major UFO cults, one of the first major middle-class cults that didn't implode. So it's kind of unusual. I mean, you certainly had other groups like the Communist Party of the United States, which was pretty culty, but it also kind of imploded later on.
Mm.
Scientology is still stuck around, which is pretty, I think, more of a testimony to the faith people have in each other, if not in the actual results.
Fair enough. I think I see where you're coming with that. That works. It's dying off now, though.
Yes.
I really believe that. I really do. I mean, people ask me about this.
In the United States, it's probably pretty much dead.
Pretty much.
In other countries, well, there was probably a lot more vulnerable people out there.
Well, basically. I think I'm still going to stick with my older saying, though, that it's dead and it just hasn't realized it yet. I really think it's just running on inertia. And I've got deeper thoughts on that in terms of maybe it's being used as a bit of a front group for Miscavige for other things, but that's just conjecture. The bottom line is that as a public religious movement, Scientology is a joke and it's on its way out, and that's the truth.
In the United States, yes.
Yeah.
One of the observations about the fall of communism was that the concept of science was so badly damaged by communism that a lot of people fled to a whole bunch of pseudoscience.
Mm.
And that meant that a lot of cults, a lot of pseudoscientific remedies became very, very popular in the post-communist world.
Okay.
And I think that contributes to some of the initial plausibility for Scientology a decade ago.
I get that, and I see your point there, and I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. There's always going to be a group of people who are either uninformed, right, or desperate. These two things go together. Who are going to fall for the pseudoscientific promotional materials, right? The propaganda of it. And unfortunately have to have a negative experience with it, sometimes tragically so, before they wake up or before others around them wake up to what is actually being peddled and realize it's just a bunch of nonsense. And that's kind of the cycle of con men and how they work, and so we're always going to have to deal with that. There's always going to be a fight. And I just think that at this point, that fight with Scientology is on the backside.
In the United States, yes, and probably in Eastern Europe too.
I think
Jeff
so.
Hawkins,
You say the United States, and I get that, but I do want to stress that the United States is the origination point of all of Scientology.
Yes,
it can't survive in Taiwan if it implodes in the United States. It's not gonna. I don't see it lasting long there, or them moving their base of operations to another country or something.
I mean, they don't need to have a huge operation in the U.S. If they've got a large number of followers elsewhere.
Maybe. I think there's certain things going on behind the scenes that indicate that might not necessarily be the case. I think if it implodes in the U.S., it implodes everywhere. But I could be wrong. I mean, predictions are a dime a dozen. So what do I know? We'll have to see how this plays out. What I think we agree on is the fact that it's on its way out.
Kind of one final point.
Yeah.
One of the things I found interesting was the way a lot of snap decisions get made when a bunch of protesters show up. So, for example, they started having Sunday services after protest. So they had to find an explanation. And they couldn't just say, well, we feel threatened by a number of protests here, and we're going to make up a reason that doesn't require creating a whole new bureaucracy. They created Sunday services. And that's probably a lot more expensive and effort-consuming than what they needed. When they're under that immediate pressure, I don't think they had the creativity left to think of a good explanation for why they didn't want protests there. Another instance, when a bunch of people showed up to Golden Era Productions asking for a tour, it was initially told that this is a public facility. You can schedule a tour. Okay, when can we schedule a tour? This is a private facility, no access.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, those kind of contradictions should have been spotted when they were thinking about what they were doing, but they weren't. Probably because they were under so much momentary stress of what would Miscavige do to people that they weren't able to think of a better explanation. Because they went from, instead of being condition white to condition yellow, they went from condition white to condition red, or maybe condition orange, where they were just all the blood was going from their brain elsewhere.
Right.
So it's our brain that comes up with the explanations. And if the blood isn't in the brain, they're not going to give a very convincing explanation.
Exactly. And yeah, that's fair enough. That's a good enough explanation for it. That's right. Yeah, good stuff, huh?
I would not use the word good in conjunction with a lot of the stuff here, but
no. Other than to say that these are good examples of high control authoritarian group behavior and manipulation and coercive control.
And how self-destructive it is.
Exactly. And this is why these things tend to implode, and why we say evil, eats itself and all that, is because this is what tends to happen with these things. So always interesting, but unfortunate that we had to have the lived experience of it in order to talk about it. Okay, well, Ciprian, thank you very much for joining me again for this, and we'll continue on with our. I think we'll have some other things to discuss next time. I think we still have a few more points to hit on this little series of stuff we're talking about, but I think we've covered stress and the Sea Org pretty well here.
Short-term stress. I still have a few comments on long-term stress, but okay. That's for the future.
Fair enough. Longer-term planning there. All right, folks, thanks very much for coming around and listening to us babble on here. I hope that this podcast was interesting, educational, and informative, and hopefully somewhat entertaining in some fashion or another. And, of course, join me on Patreon if you want to help me out, help this channel out. I definitely need it. And let's keep these lights on and let's keep this show going. Help me out with that. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.